This video is sponsored by Maska Products. I'm going to show you how to build this beautiful outdoor bench. You can make it with common lumber that you find at your local home store. Very easy joinery methods. Anybody can build this with just a few basic tools. If you're interested in building one of these for yourself, I have plans available linked in the description and the pinned comment. Let's go. I purchased my lumber locally from a place called Barton's and another place called Allied here in Monticello, Arkansas. And why I like using them versus a big box store lumber is because I can get #1 grade 2x, like 2x6s, as well as 2x4s, appearance grade, basically #1 1x. It makes some projects look better and there's less knots as well as splits and things like that. If you saw my 99% of beginners don't know how to store lumber video, then you know that we need to let this acclimate for a couple of days in the shop before we start building with it, if at all possible. Sometimes that's not possible, but if it is best to let this stuff acclimate to your environment. I picked out the straightest boards for the longer pieces, and then any that are going to be shorter, then I can use some of the more bent or bowed boards because you're going to take small chunks out of it. It won't matter as much. First thing we're going to do for this bench, I said bench, B-E-N-C-H, we're going to cut out the seat frame, where the seat's going to go. First thing you want to do is square up this end of the 2x4 before you start cutting it to length. That way you get everything nice and square starting off. Typically when I have two boards the same length, I'm going to line up one end to make sure it's perfectly flush, and then I'll line it up on the other end where the blade is going to cut. That way I'll get two exact pieces. Especially if you don't have stop blocks or it's longer than your stop block setup, such as here. Pocket hole time. Now we're going to pocket hole this thing together. I like pocket holes because they're strong and they're easy, and you don't have screws sticking everywhere. There's going to be enough in this project as it is, so the frame's just going to be pocket hole together. This is basically set up like it's going to be. All of your seat slats will go on top of this. For this project, I'm using my Maska M2 Pro Pocket Hole Jig. This is by far my favorite pocket hole jig that I've ever used. They are a sponsor of this video, but it's a product that I actually love. I like how easy it is to adjust the height for the stock size you're using, and in this case, 1.5 inches for 2x4s. I also really love how the clamping system works because it's such a solid clamp. You don't have to worry about your pieces moving while you're trying to drill those pocket holes. And it does come with everything you need to set the bit height for the stock that you're using. The reason I like the M2 Pro best is because it does have these stock supports that go out on each side. That way if you're drilling into longer stock, you don't have to worry about it tipping and moving on you. The Maska M2 Pro comes with everything you need for pocket hole joinery. You're going to get a drill bit, the driver bit, the jig itself with the support wings, as well as the Allen keys and everything you need to set up everything. This mounting board is sold separately by a different company. I'll link to that in the description if you're interested. This bench is going outside, so you want to make sure to use coated screws like these blue ones. That way they don't rust. I'm going to be using wood glue and pocket holes here to join all these together. On the two outside pieces, I'm going to turn the pocket holes to the inside. While it's not ideal, just for strength-wise, it's really not going to be that load-bearing on those ends. So I'm going to go ahead and turn those on the inside so you don't see the pocket holes from the outside. On the inside braces, it doesn't matter. Once I got everything lined up, I'm just going to drive the screws into the boards. You'll want to use some type of clamp here to hold everything together so it doesn't move while you drive those screws. Now we're going to install the center braces. All you want to do is center these up in between this frame here. Just going to make sure the tops are flush and it's square up and down. That way everything just kind of fits together better. Next thing I'm gonna do is cut out 4 legs. I'm gonna cut these at 23¼ inches long. Now I'm gonna set my seat height at 16 inches. It's a little shorter than I usually do at 18 inches, but if you put seat cushions on here, that it always puts it a little bit too tall. So if you're a taller person or you're building this for a taller person, you may want to extend these legs up a couple of inches so that you can set your seat height accordingly. Next thing we'll do is drill pocket holes in the aprons for the legs. In other words, the cross piece that goes across the top of the legs. Next, we're going to assemble our leg assemblies. Super easy. You're going to have 2 pocket holes per side. Use a face clamp or something to basically keep these pieces in line, nice and flush, and then drive the pocket hole screws. If your cuts are good 90 degrees, you shouldn't have any issues with everything lining up. Again, make sure you're using outdoor screws. Now this part's optional. I'm going to plug these pocket holes with a 3/8 inch dowel. They also sell pocket hole plugs. There's a couple of reasons you want to do this. One, aesthetics, because it's going to look better once it's finished and you won't have holes in the armrest. Another reason you want to do this is to protect it from water getting in there and things like that while it's outside. Now we're going to cut our back supports. You're only going to actually need about a little over 6 foot of 2x6. So if you need just to buy just one 8-footer and you'll have a 2-foot piece left over, you can do that. We're gonna cut 2 pieces at 18 inches starting out. So to create an angled back, all we're gonna do is basically we're gonna keep 1.5 inches on the top. We'll measure up, say 4.5, 4.25 from the bottom. Then we'll connect those 2 lines and then we'll cut that piece off, and that will give our angled back. To cut that angle, you can use a jigsaw, or if you have a table saw with a tapering jig such as this, if you saw that video where I made this, it's super easy to do on there. After cutting the angles on the seat supports, I'm going to cut two 2x4s out, the equal lengths. These are 47 inches long. We're going to drill pocket holes in those, and that's going to support our seat back slats. During this project, I've been using the 3M dust extractor, and I do like that they have the step-down dust adapter that fits into most ports, like on the Maska Pocket Hole Jig. So this seat support, or the back slat support, needs to be flush with this angle, and it'll be flush with the top. Now you will have a little bit of an angle up the top that's not matching the crossboard, but you can trim that off later if you want. Now the easiest way to do that, instead of trying to hold this in the air and get it right, is just to flip this over, put the pocket holes on the back. Then you'll just line up that top corner with this corner, and because it's on a flat surface, it'll all line up on the other side and screw these in place. Now we're going to put the middle brace on the back, and I'm just going to measure down 4 inches from the top board between the two. So inside and inside measurements, and screw this in place with pocket holes and glue. Now this is what your seat back frame should look like. We get these front pieces lined up with that angle, and then we'll attach the slats, and then we'll put it on the frame. Still got a little bit of work to do, but it's looking good. For the back slats, I use 1x4s, and I cut 14 of them out at the exact same length, or as close to the same length as I can get it. Now to install the seat back slats, what I'm going to do, or what I have done, is I've just set this back frame down inside this frame, because that's where it will be mounted whenever we're ready to mount it, which we're not yet. And then I'm just going to take 2 of my seat slats that I will be using later. These are just 1x6s. We're going to stack those on top of this frame, and we're going to use that as a spacer. It'll make it a lot easier. And then what we're going to do is start spacing these out and screwing them into the back supports. To make sure I get all my screws exactly right all the way across, I'm going to just measure up from here, look at the center of the boards. We're looking at about 4 1/4. Again, we're not building a clock, so it doesn't have to be exact. And then also 12 up here. So we'll just measure from the bottom up on all of these, 4 1/4 and 12, pre-drill some holes, and then we'll attach them. So it'd be much easier if I just take a countersink bit like this, make one that's the template, just set them on top of the next one, and then I can just basically make a pilot hole and then countersink drill through there. If you line everything up, bottom and top, side to side, everything should match when we start putting them up there. For the first back slat, I'm going to round over or round the corner using a flush trim bit with the Craig radius jig. If you don't have this, you can certainly just use a sander or even a jigsaw. We'll do this on both ends. For the first back slat, we're going to flush it up on the side. We're going to put 2 1/4 deck screws or outdoor ready screws, so we'll make sure you use those so they don't rust. And we're just going to go all the way down through there, spacing them about a carpenter's width pencil apart, which is just about 5/16 of an inch. So I messed up. So the pencil spacer was too much, and it left too big of a gap to try to compensate over the last 3 or 4 boards. Not a big deal. We just take all the screws out. It's fine. I'm going to use this rule. It's about an 1/8 inch thick, give or take a smidgen. A smidgen is a technical term for a little bit. So all you have to do is put that rule in there, and we'll space it out. When we get to about 4 or 5 boards left, we'll look and see, but I should be pretty close to space those out equally, so you'll never know it unless you watch this video. So once you get the back slats put on, you can take it out of the frame. You may notice that if everything isn't just perfect, in other words, you couldn't get all of your cuts just exactly perfect, there may be a tiny bit of difference between those boards up and down. If you want to take care of that or straighten everything up, all you have to do is lay a board up here that's longer than this and just clamp it down, and then use that as a straight edge to cut the top of these all exactly the same. You can do the same thing on the bottom as well, or if you have a track saw, you can do the same thing. And that'll just line everything up nice and perfect. If you don't want to do that, then it's still fine just like this, and most people will never notice unless they get really up close and see it. It's really up to you. That just makes it look more professional. Next thing I'm gonna do is just go ahead and sand the back to 120 grit. It's gonna be much easier to do it now versus after it's installed or attached to the frame. Also sand that frame to 120 grit before we move on to the next step. If you wanna go the extra mile, these little knot holes you see that are completely encircled with opening around them, those will work loose. Matter of fact, that one is loose now, if you can see that. Those will work loose over time, and then you'll have a hole there. We don't want that. We're gonna go put some medium thick Star Bond in brown, because I'm gonna use a brown colored outdoor finish. All you're going to do is run a little bead of this glue all the way around that. This is going to lock that in forever. This activator makes it set up within about 30 seconds. We're going to do that on all the knot holes. We'll sand that flush, and then we'll be ready to move on to the next step. Also, if you find any knot holes that have like a crack in them, you can seal those up if you want to. that just helps go the extra mile. Now it's time to attach the back. I'm gonna make sure that the frame is sitting flush on the table as well as this back support upright. I'm gonna drive one screw in this corner, then I'm gonna square this up, and then I'm gonna drive about 4 or 5 total in there, driving from the inside out. That way you don't have any screws showing on the outside of your frame. You also want to make sure you pre-drill these holes so that they don't split the wood and ruin your project. We're gonna do this on both ends. The first seat slat I'm gonna install is the one on the back. Now this one really isn't necessary, but to get the correct spacing, it's just easier and it'll look more finished. Now, one thing you can do if you want to is notch this piece out so that this extends over. I don't really see a need for that here, but if you wanted to do that, you can. Those seat braces that are underneath, just gonna take a square and mark a line right in the center of that brace so that we'll have something to screw into and we can keep those lines straight going across. From there, you'll just pre-drill and drill the holes in. You also put a few across the back just for good measure. Once we get the back seat slat set, say that 3 times fast, we're going to go ahead and cut the rest of them 53 inches, just shy of 53, give us a little play, and then we'll notch out around everything that we need notches on. For the seat slats, we're just using common 1x6. These are spruce. You can use pine or whatever you got. To get our notch around this frame, this upright, I'm just going to use this little speed square. It's a DFM square. That'll mark on each end exactly where it will notch out and slide in there. Now we need to know the distance. Pretty easy way to do that is just to measure back minus 3/8 of an inch because we're going to have a 3/8 inch gap. Looks like about 1 1/8 inches. We'll just take a jigsaw and cut those out. Now to space these seat slats out, I'm going to use 3/8 inch dowels. Now if you don't have 3/8 inch dowels, you can also use 3/8 inch drill bits or just cut some 3/8 inch shims or pieces of wood to slide in there between these boards. Once I'm happy with the fit, I'm going to sand this before I put it in because it's going to be very difficult to get back there to sand that if we don't do that now. To attach the seat slats, I'm using the same 1¼ inch screws we use on the back, and I pre-drilled and countersunk each one to prevent the wood from splitting. I'm going to set my miter saw on 35 degrees, and I'm going to cut an angle on the bottom of the legs just to give it a little something extra just so they're not just squared off legs. If you don't have a miter saw, then you can just do this with a jigsaw, whatever you got. You want to go ahead and sand these leg assemblies before we attach them. On the bottom where we cut those angles, I'm going to go ahead and round those over just a little bit with that sander so that we don't have any sharp corners. This is where we can adjust our seat height depending on how tall, who you're making this is for. We typically make ours at about 18 inches, but if you wanted to put cushions on here, then you need to take that into account as well. So from the bottom of the leg to the top of the seat, we're gonna make this 16 inches. That way we can have a good cushion on there if we so choose, and if we don't, it's still gonna be comfortable for most people. To make attaching the leg assemblies easier, I'm using some quick clamps that help hold it in place. That way I don't have to fight them while I'm trying to get everything laid out. So you're looking at about 11 3/4 from the bottom to the bottom of the rail, from the bottom of the leg to the bottom of your front apron. With that 3/4 inch piece on there, it should give you 16 inch seat height. All right, from here we have a little bit of an option on what we can do. This is the last piece, or the last seat slat. You see that it's hanging over maybe 1/4 inch on the front. If we flush mount this leg to the front, then this is what it'll look like. You could just kind of 45 that or sand that over just to give it a little more roundness. Or you could inset this about 1 inch and then we can notch out around that and it'll kind of give it a little more finished look. That's what I'm gonna do. I've marked the legs under on the back side just so that I'll know where they're at. Uh-oh. Just because of that. I'm gonna use glue here because I want all the strength I can get on these legs. The main thing here is you're gonna make sure that the legs are exactly 11 3/4 from the apron on both ends. Attaching the next leg assembly should be relatively easy. We're gonna measure in 1 inch again. That way we know how far back to set our leg assembly. Then we can just set it up here, clamp it, and screw it from inside. That way you don't have to worry about holding anything up. I'm gonna make a mark at 11 3/4 just to make it easier on me. So for the front seat slat, we're going to need to notch this out so that it'll go back in there, but leave a little bit here to cover the front of that. It's just a look thing. If you wanted to inset that again, you could. So I just put a dowel in there. We're gonna slide that back until it bumps out. Then we'll just mark the front of that front leg. Do that on both ends, we'll notch it out. Using a speed square will help guide you and keep yours cut square-ish. To attach the final seat slat, I'm doing it the same way that I did the rest of them. Then I'm gonna use a sander to round over that front corner. That's gonna soften up that edge and it's gonna make it match the rest of the bench. Next thing I'm gonna do is cut out the armrests. They're gonna be about 24 1/4 inches long. I want them to stick out exactly the same length as the seat, so it all matches. And on the front 2 corners, I'm gonna round them over similar to what we did on the back slats. Before you install those handrails, you're going to want to sand those down at 120 grit. Make sure you hit the ends and around that corner just so you can soften up those sharp edges. You don't want nobody getting a splinter because you failed to sand the edges. There's a couple of ways you can attach these handrails. You can pocket hole up from underneath and then plug those holes, or you can just do what we've done on the rest of this bench on as far as the seat slats and the back slats and just drill and screw those in. And I think that's what we're going to do here. I'm going to flush it up against the back. That way the front overhangs, and then we'll drill down into there. Make sure you mark before you drill. To make this outdoor ready, I'm going to use this Cabot Australian timber oil. I spray it on with my HomeRite sprayer. Very light coat. You don't want to overdo it because it will run. It's very thin. But this is one of the best outdoor finishes I've found that takes little to no maintenance. About every couple of years you'll need to reapply, but it holds up extremely well to the Arkansas weather. I've got a whole video on outdoor projects, how to finish them, what woods to choose. I'll link that at the end of this video, as well as that card you see popping up now. We dedicate this video in memory of Miss Rhonda Brantley Sanderland, one of my wife's best friends at school, an amazing teacher and an even better friend. We're donating this bench to the Druid Central Middle School. They're having a plaque made for it in honor of Miss Sanderland. Miss Sanderland, you will be missed greatly. What an amazing project this was, and it's going to a great cause. If you'd like to see another build of ours, an outdoor sectional, click that box right there. Click in the box to get you the big old virtual fist bump. Also, another one of my favorite outdoor projects right there.